Hello and welcome back to Dashing Swordsman Painting. Today we'll be speed painting some US Airborne Infantry, and they'll be the backbone of a bolt-action army that I'm painting up as a surprise for a friend of mine. I'll show you the difference in a couple varieties of uniform colors and skin tones that I tried, so you can decide what works the best for your army. My goal is to get about 50 of these guys done, and in a very time-efficient manner to get them mailed out along with the vehicles so that we can get a game in when I see them at Historicon. Therefore, I'll be using a sort of slap chop adjacent kind of style, maybe sacrificing a little bit of historical color accuracy. The models are all going to look really good when they're on the table together. Okay, let's start by taking a look at the models. These models are actually kit bashes. I had a bunch of leftover arms, heads, and weapons and such from building the airborne troops in the Band of Brothers starter set, so I turned to 3D printing as a way to use up all of those out of the bit box kind of all at once in one project. All of the bodies and enough of the heads and extra weapons are from RKX Miniatures. I backed their Hurtgen Forest Kickstarter, and the models turned out fantastic. I highly recommend checking them out for Winter US and Germans, and also take a look at their Canadians and Fallschirmjäger from their second Kickstarter that are on their website. I assembled the models using green stuff to fill the gaps where the Warlord arms didn't exactly line up with the angles on the 3D printed bodies, but once painted, it looks just fine. I primed the models in black and then did a pretty strong zenithal of white so that we can show the transparent contrast paints over the top of it. Of specific note, this paint scheme was initially adapted from Sonic Sledgehammer's fantastic process. I've only made a few customizations to it. I'll try and link to his video below. It's well worth a watch. Alright, so the first color we're going to start with is on the steel helmets. It's not actually a contrast paint, but is US dark green from Vallejo. I like the very matte finish that it gives, and I think it gives a lot of sort of realistic visual interest to distinguish it from the green on the rest of the uniform that we're going to use. Make sure you're working in nice, thin coats. After the first coat on the helmet dries, apply a second coat to make sure you get really good coverage. Next, we'll do our first uniform color on the coat using Militarum Green. Apply it all over in one coat. Try and stay controlled at the edges, but if you slip over a little, you can always clean it up with a little bit of white paint. I'm using this color in the army to represent the M1943 color jackets, which are a little darker in tone from the M1941 jackets. I'll also do the pants in the same color. Now, for the parts of the army that I want in the M1941 uniform, I'll be using Skeleton Horde. Same process as the Militarum Green. Make sure you get it on in one good coat. I think you would notice pooling with this even more, the sort of light contrast color, so really make sure you're avoiding big pools in the recesses. Yes, I am using two different uniform colors in this army. Thanks for asking. For this army, we may be wanting to represent some of the models with veteran rules or inexperienced rules. I'm not exactly sure what the army builder for version 3 of Bolt Action is going to be like, and since all the models have approximately the same sculpt and loadout, unlike, say, Games Workshop games where veterans are often a completely different model, I find it really expedient for tabletop games to be able to tell the difference at a glance, and for my opponent across the way to be able to remember. So this way I can say the guys in the M41 uniforms are the veterans, they've been at the front for longer, and the guys in the M43 uniforms are the fresh replacements coming up with the newer gear. I also understand this may not be a perfect color representation for historical accuracy, but this paint is all about getting the army done and getting it onto the tabletop to play some awesome games. Next, we'll work on the straps of the webbing. First, we'll clean up any overages from where we applied the jacket color using an opaque white. I'm using bold titanium white from Pearl Curl because I think it's the best flowing white for detail work that I've ever used. Next, we'll paint the straps in two steps to get the distinctive color we want. First, we use Skeleton Horde, working nice and thin to tint the straps tan. After that dries fully, we'll use Plague Bearer flesh, also thinned down about 50-50, to give the canvas webbing that sort of green-tan tint. This is going to be especially important if you've used Skeleton Horde for like an M41 jacket, so that it sets off the straps from that big block of background color. Thanks to Sonic Sledgehammer in particular for this trick. Next, we'll do the leather with Core Grunt of Fur. I'm going to use this for the boots, the rifle slings, and any other bits that you want to highlight out. Pistol holster or belt pouch might be cool. You could also do the rifle slings in any of the greens or khakis, of whatever you used for the webbing color. For the entrenching tool handles, I used wildwood to give them a nice dark wood look. Apparently they were also painted in OD green sometimes, so if you wanted to save this step, you could maybe use the same green from the helmet. Next, I'll do the wood of the gun stocks with snakebite leather to give a nice, light, warm wood look. Make sure to get all the way around, working really carefully to not splash over on the uniform. I keep an old brush and some water next to me in case I need to immediately use it to wipe off a mistake. Worst case, you could repaint the base coat and the coat color, but that's just a lot of extra steps. We'll be experimenting with a couple different approaches to skin tones here. First up is straight up Guilliman flesh out of the pot for a light skin tone. Do this on the face and the hands. I noticed on my first model that the extreme highlights of the black to white zenithal looked kind of weird with the skin tone, especially since the face didn't get as much zenithal under the helmet rim, and all those underlying tones are in the grayscale. And being the focal point of the model, I like faces to try and look pretty decent. So I'm going to take an ivory color here from Pro Acryl, again because of how easy it is to use, and I'm going to apply that on the skin of the face and the hands as a new base coat. I'm mostly just trying to get the upward facing surfaces. Being a speed paint, I'm not trying to add too much time to get in the way of the recesses, and the contrast will do a lot of that work for us. Taking a look at them side by side after applying a layer of Guilliman flesh, just like the first time, you can see the difference that lightening and warming up that underlayer made. Especially on the hands, I am much happier with those. Next, we're going to base coat the metals of the weapons using German Grey from Vallejo. To me, it sells as visually black, but is just light enough to show variation when we put a wash over it. Again, since we're working close to our other contrast paints, working carefully is key. You could definitely use Black Templar or something if you wanted to stick to the all contrast line, but I personally like this look and it takes about the same amount of time. Next, we'll do a dry brush to highlight using a gunmetal color. Here I'm using Lead Belcher. We're going to get just a little bit on a small frayed brush and swipe it gently over the top of our metals, just grabbing those top edges. In my head, these are the edges where it might have been dinged or rubbed against things, and so it's really showing that new metal underneath, and visually it really helps set it off from the rest of the surrounding contrast paints. Next, I do an all-over brown wash to help get into all of the recesses and kind of tie all the colors together. I'm using the brown wash from Pro Acryl, but you could use Agrax Earthshade or whatever your homemade wash of choice is. I've thinned it down about 50-50 with water to make sure that I'm not overly staining the first coats of paint, and definitely making sure that it doesn't pool in the recesses. But the wash goes on quick for a batch paint, and then we'll set that aside to dry. Now we'll move on to the base. As I mentioned, I'm going for a unit that's fighting in Europe in early winter, so I'm going to start with a dark earth texture paste from Vallejo, and apply that with an old brush or a small spatula all over the base. I also like to get just a little bit onto the uppers of the boot sometimes to show that the Mini isn't just floating on top of the environment, but is interacting with it. After that's dry, I'll hit it with a real quick dry brush of a medium brown just to give it a little bit of depth. Next, I'll add some flock and tufts, since he's not just on bare dirt. The flock is a mix of yellow, green, brown that I picked up from my local hobby shop, and the tufts are from the Army Painter. I'll apply a couple of dots of very thin superglue on a couple random places on the base, Then grab a tuft with some tweezers and put it on the glue wherever you want. Give it a gentle press to make sure it's all the way down. Then I'll carefully drop some flocking over the rest of the glue. You could definitely do the dunk and swish method if you want, but since this is a small container, I'm just trying to be careful and avoid a mess. Make sure you tap off any excess and then set it aside to dry. I like to put it in front of a small desk fan to make sure that I don't get that weird frosty effect from superglue fumes as it dries. Finally, we'll add our snow effect by using Valhallan Blizzard, straight out of the pot with an old brush. I'm putting it in a couple locations on the base, not covering the entire base, just a couple small drifts, and also putting a dusting on some of the plants, and then a little tiny bit on the shoulders and helmet of them. And after that, our models are done. Here you can see the side-by-side of the dark green and the lighter khaki, and the whole army of these guys looks pretty cohesive on the table. I've now added some decals from Warlord games, denoting that these guys are 101st Airborne, and also giving them a variety of ranks and some of the symbols for the medics and such. Thanks again for joining us here at Dashing Swords and Painting, and again a special thanks to Sonic Sledgehammer Studio for paving the way for this project to be able to happen. He has a fantastic new video about how to do a really high quality paint for US Winter Infantry. Go check it out as well. Let me know what you'd like to see in the future. Good luck and have fun painting.